There is a train station in Hokkaido that serves 3 passengers per day. Not 3,000, not 300, 3. The station has a platform. It has a shelter. It has a timetable. Trains stop there twice a day, in each direction, on schedule, with the same precision as any station in central Tokyo. Nobody checks your ticket. Nobody sells you one. There is no staff, no office, no intercom, no camera that you can see. You board, you ride, you arrive. Japan has hundreds of stations like this. Small, unstaffed, operating quietly on the edges of the network, serving communities that the rest of the country has mostly forgotten. And the fact that they exist at all, that they continue to operate, maintained and scheduled and functional for a handful of daily passengers, says something specific and revealing about how Japan thinks about public infrastructure, about rural communities, and about what a railway system is actually for. Unstaffed stations, called muninchi eki in Japanese, are not a niche phenomenon. They are a significant part of the railway network. Of Japan's approximately 9,000 train stations, roughly half are unstaffed for all or most of their operating hours. On rural regional lines, the smaller networks operated by regional railway companies, and the third sector railways that serve depopulating prefectures, the proportion is far higher. Entire lines operate with no station staff at any point along their route. This is not negligence. It is a deliberate operational response to a specific and growing problem: the collapse of passenger volumes on rural lines driven by Japan's demographic crisis. The arithmetic is straightforward and unforgiving. A staffed station requires a minimum of several staff members across multiple shifts to operate safely around the clock. That staffing costs money: salaries, benefits, training, scheduling overhead. On a rural station handling 50 passengers per day, those staffing costs cannot possibly be recovered from fare revenue. The station runs at a loss. The question is how large that loss should be allowed to be before the station closes entirely. Removing staff is the answer Japan has most commonly chosen. It cuts the operating cost dramatically, sometimes by 80% or more, while keeping the station functional for the passengers who still depend on it. The alternative, in most cases, is closure. The practical question unstaffed stations raise immediately is, how does anyone pay? Japan has solved this in several ways, deployed in combinations depending on the station and the line. IC cards, prepaid contactless cards like Suica and Passmo, are the dominant solution for most of the network. You tap in at the start of your journey and tap out at the end, and the fare is automatically calculated and deducted. No ticket required, no staff required, no transaction at the station level. The gate opens, you board. On rural lines, where IC card infrastructure has not been installed, often because the investment cannot be justified by passenger volumes, conductor-based ticketing handles the gap. You board the train, and the conductor who walks the carriage checks and sells tickets on board. The station has no ticketing function at all. The train itself is the point of sale. Some unstaffed rural stations use an onboard payment system derived from bus practice. You take a numbered slip when you board at an unstaffed station and pay the driver or conductor when you alight at a staffed destination, with the fare calculated from the slip number. The elegance of these solutions is that they do not require the passenger to do much differently from a staffed station. The complexity of ticketing has been redistributed away from the station building and onto either the card infrastructure or the train itself, without significantly increasing the burden on the traveler. You board, you ride, you pay somewhere. The absence of staff at the station is, in most cases, nearly invisible to the passenger. Understanding unstaffed stations requires understanding the demographic reality that produced them. Japan's rural population has been declining for 70 years. Villages that once supported local schools, post offices, and shops now struggle to maintain even basic services. The communities that rural railway lines were built to serve are, in many cases, a fraction of their former size and aging rapidly. The lines themselves reflect this history precisely. They were built in the early to mid 20th century to serve communities that were then viable: farming villages, fishing ports, fostery towns, mining settlements. The railway was essential infrastructure, connecting communities to markets, students to schools, workers to employment. Stations were staffed because they were busy, because they anchored commercial activity, because the community around them was alive in ways that justified the investment. Then the communities emptied. Young people left for cities, schools consolidated, shops closed, the mine closed, the fishing fleet shrank, and the passengers who once filled the trains trickled down to dozens, then single digits. The railway companies that operate these lines, many of them regional operators and third sector companies created specifically to take over lines that JR judged unviable, face an impossible equation. The cost of running the line exceeds fare revenue by multiples. Subsidies from prefectural and municipal governments bridge part of the gap. Removing station staff bridges more of it. Some of these lines have become famous precisely for their extreme low passenger situations. Kyushirataki Station in Hokkaido, a station that operated for years, reportedly because a single student used it for her commute to school, with Japan Railways keeping the station open and scheduling trains specifically for her, became an internationally known story about what Japanese railways were willing to do for a community, however small. When she graduated, the station closed. That story, true or somewhat embellished by the telling, captures something real about the values underlying Japan's rural railway system. The station existed because someone needed it. When no one needed it anymore, it stopped existing.
Japan's response to the staffing problem on rural lines is not purely removal. It is also substitution, replacing human staff with technology wherever possible, and doing so with a characteristic Japanese commitment to making the technology actually work. Remote monitoring systems allow a single operator in a central control room to oversee multiple unstaffed stations simultaneously. Cameras cover platforms and entrances. Intercoms connect passengers to staff who may be physically located dozens of kilometers away. Emergency assistance, information requests, and accessibility support can be provided remotely, with response times measured in seconds. Some stations have installed automated gates that can be managed remotely, opened for passengers with accessibility needs, closed in response to safety incidents, monitored for unusual activity. The gate is unstaffed, but it is not unmonitored. Ticket vending machines at unstaffed stations handle the ticketing function without human intervention, accepting cash, IC cards, and credit cards, and producing physical tickets for passengers who prefer them, or who are traveling on routes where conductor-checked paper tickets remain the standard. But technology has limits, and Japan has learned them in specific ways. An elderly passenger who cannot figure out the ticket machine at an unstaffed station has no one to ask. A passenger with a complex accessibility need cannot easily communicate it to a remote operator through an intercom. A station that looks unattended signals to some passengers, particularly women traveling alone at night, a different kind of vulnerability than a staffed one. Japanese railways have responded to these limits with what might be called part-time staffing, deploying staff at unstaffed stations during peak hours only, while leaving them unstaffed for the majority of operating hours. The station gets human presence when it most needs it. The operating cost falls significantly compared to full-time staffing. The solution is imperfect in the way that all real-world compromises are imperfect, but it extends the life of stations that would otherwise close entirely.
The unstaffed station is, in its quiet way, one of the most honest objects in the Japanese landscape. It is honest about what is happening to rural Japan. The depopulation, the aging, the slow withdrawal of the infrastructure that once made small communities viable. The unstaffed station is what you get when a community no longer justifies full investment, but still needs to be served. It is honest about what Japanese railways prioritize.
The station that serves 3 passengers per day is still operating because those 3 passengers need it. Need it to get to the hospital, to reach the nearest town, to maintain the connection to the world that the railway represents. Closing it would save money. Keeping it open costs money. Japan, more often than not, keeps it open. It is honest about the trust that underpins the entire Japanese transit system. An unstaffed station with no barriers, no visible cameras, and an honor system payment mechanism works in Japan because the passengers using it are the same passengers who stand in neat lines, let people exit before boarding, and don't eat on trains. The unstaffed station is only possible because the cultural infrastructure of trust, responsibility, and collective norm following is already in place. In most countries, removing staff from a station does not simply reduce costs. It changes the character of the station. Makes it feel less safe, more anonymous, more subject to misuse. In Japan, the character of the station is largely unchanged by the presence or absence of a ticket seller. The norms that govern behavior in the space are not held by the staff member. They are held by the people who use the space. The unstaffed station works because of what the passengers bring.
So, why do some Japanese train stations have no staff? Because the communities they serve have shrunk to the point where full staffing is economically impossible. But the communities still exist, and the people in them still need to travel. And Japan has chosen, again and again, to keep the connection open, even when the economics argue for closing it. And because the system of unstaffed stations works. Because ticketing has been redistributed onto IC cards and conductors, because technology monitors what staff once watched, and because the passengers who use these stations bring to them the same culture of trust and responsibility they bring to every other shared space in Japan. 3 passengers per day, twice daily service, on schedule, no staff. In most countries, that station would have closed decades ago. In Japan, the train still stops because someone is waiting.